What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Vine and Branches podcast. Hopefully you're having a good day. If not, hopefully we can make it a little bit better. Today we're going to be jumping into John chapter 13. And bear with me. I'm whooped, so I might be a little out of the headspace right now. But I'm going to start us reading. Verse 1. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God, was going back to God, rose from the supper. He laid aside his outer garments and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began washing the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, do you wash my feet?" Jesus answered him, What am I doing? You do not understand now, but afterward you will understand." I want to stop there. I want to ask what you thought about the first thing that stuck out to me was verse 2. What do you think about that? It was when it said the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot that he was going to betray him. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think that he already was leaning that way. And so obviously you can kind of talk about this because you wrote a paper about predestination, but Judas Iscariot was predestined from the beginning to betray Jesus. Like that was his sole purpose in life, was to betray Jesus. And it really becomes this great story. And I think that this is just talking about how the devil's starting to enter him, and he's starting to get these thoughts. He's starting to buy into these temptations of, oh, I might betray this guy,
Absolutely. I was talking to a person about it, and we were talking about the fact of like free will and all these things. And they were like, well, do you think Judas had free will? And we got onto this whole topic, and we're talking about this, and then we were reading it, and we're like, well, you can't just necessarily just go off, well, did he? Because obviously in the Bible it says, and it talks about the devil specifically entering him and all these things. And so then we went down the rabbit hole of, well, did Judas kill himself, or did the devil kill Judas when he was entered? Anyways, whole rabbit hole on that whole idea of whether Judas had free will to do all the things he did and the
What
decisions.
Conclusion did y'all come to?
I personally, I wouldn't necessarily, I don't know for a fact, but I would, the way I think of it, I would say that Judas was obviously leaning towards these ways, and the devil entered him. And I would, in my opinion, say that the devil, it definitely influenced that. Does that make sense? But I do think if, let's say, the devil didn't enter him, I still, in my mind, would say that Judas would have done things like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
I still think he was on that train.
Yeah. I think that it was ultimately a choice.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
In order for Judas Iscariot not to have a choice, that would be God not loving Judas Iscariot. And so even though it says, the devil entered him, he still had the temptations. He still had to go to the officers and the Pharisees and say, like, look, I'll betray this guy if you give me a little bit of change.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I think that Judas Iscariot definitely had the choice in the matter.
Agreed. And that the devil just kind of worked off of his fleshly instincts,
temptations and desires. But this is just because Judas Iscariot had a choice doesn't necessarily mean that God didn't know he was going to pick it.
Yeah, absolutely.
100% God knew. He's all knowing. He's omniscient.
Yeah.
So.
And on that rabbit hole, let's keep going on this. You talked about my paper. I was researching about it, and people have asked the question, Well, if God's all knowing, doesn't he play a role or share part of the responsibility of when we choose something? Because he knew we were going to do it, right? So what would you say about that? I have a quote. I don't actually know where it was quoted, but I remember a quote from one of my sources. I'll say in a second. But
So the question was like,
if God knew, does he share part of the responsibility? Is the questions people have asked about it.
I don't think so. I don't think that God has really a part to play in our decision making. I think that so I was reading Galatians this morning, and when it says, keep in step with the Spirit and you won't gratify the desires of the flesh, that's kind of what I think of is when we are operating in the Spirit, we're not going to gratify those desires. And so we're not going to gratify those bad choices. We're going to gratify good choices. So what we choose, yes, it can be led by God or it can be against God. But God will lead you in one specific way. It's kind of like the saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And so that's kind of where my mind goes when you ask that question.
Dude, that was great. Something I said in my paper is I was like, well, I know Christmas will come around like clockwork. It doesn't mean I played a role in it. And so, like, you can know something's going to happen, but it doesn't mean you played a role in making it happen.
Yeah, that's so good.
So, verse 8, I believe, is what we were on. Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no share with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, the one who is bathed does not need to wash, except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you. For he knew who was to betray him. That was why he said, not all of you are clean. Stop right there and talk about the fact that you had just said that he knows, and it says it again right there, that he was like, he knows who's going to betray him.
Yeah, and it's kind of foreshadowing right here about saying, oh, yeah, y'all are all clean except for one of you.
Yeah.
And so he's right there kind of to me saying, oh, yeah, y'all are all like loving me. Y'all are all my disciples except for one. One of y'all is a rat. Basically is what he's saying. And it's not out of a place of like, you're a rat, like I don't like you, I don't love you. Because obviously Jesus died for everybody. Jesus died for Judas Iscariot as well. What he was saying was he was just laying it out there, I think. He was just laying out the truth. And sometimes the truth is hard. Because all of the disciples will learn in a second, look around at each other and like, who is it? Lord, who's it going to be? You know? And then he goes on to talk about Peter denying him 3 times before the rooster crows. And he goes on to all these things. He's just laying out truth. He's just laying out what he knows, what he's been revealed to by God. He's just laying these things out there. And so it's not necessarily like out of a place of, oh, I hate you. No, it's still out of love, but it's saying, you know, this is going to happen. Like he's just warning him.
Agreed. And something I gathered right there when I read that is Peter goes, oh, you shall never wash my feet. And Jesus goes, if I do not wash you, you have no share with me. And he totally switches what he says. Then he goes, in verse 9, he says, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and head. So he started with, no, you don't need to wash my feet. And Jesus is like, oh, if I don't, then you have no share with me. He goes, okay, wash my feet, my hands, my head, wash it all then. Right? Yeah. I loved the way he switched up so quick. Oh, if this is what needs to happen to have a share with you, give it all to me. So, what do you have anything else to say of what we were?
Yeah, it's kind of like I kind of in my brain went to like if you get squirted with a water gun, or it's like somebody pours water on you and you're not wet already. Like it's like, dude, why would you do that? Or like, what are you doing? But then Jesus is like, well, if you don't do this, like if I don't like wet you, then you don't have any part of me. And so I just see Peter like in my mind just like jumping in a pool. He's like, all right, well then if that's what it's going to be, if that's what it's going to take, then I'm going to go all in. And I actually kind of love that perspective from Peter. Is like, okay, if this is necessary, let's go all in.
Absolutely. Agreed. And something you said about that, share a little story while we're on it. Water guns. Me and Caleb went to youth camp last year, and we brought these. Here's an idea for any of you youth kids that are going to a camp or kids camp. Hey, But we brought these tiny, like, how big would you say?
I mean, they're probably the
4
size
inches?
of your knuckle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're tiny.
Got it from Dollar Tree for $1.25, 3-pack, and boy, those things could shoot them far. I mean, I was not expecting that kind of range.
So we brought them to youth camp, and we would sit in the lunchroom. We would fill them up, and we would hold them down low below the table and launch water up and make it rain down on people. Dude, we had such a blast.
And the funny part about it was when you'd squirt them, you would just act like nothing happened, and you wouldn't even be looking at that table. You wouldn't even be looking at the person that you squirted, and they're just looking around, like looking up at the ceiling, looking at the floor, like, dude, what just happened? Is there water dripping? And it was low key really funny. I mean, it was funny to just watch these people sit here and be like, what is happening? And I think the funniest part was when we would continually do it. We had that group that just moved tables completely.
Yeah, this group moved to a different table, like 2 tables over, because they thought something was dripping on them. And then we shot them again where they moved. Oh, dude, we're pranksters at heart, man. Love
For
a good
sure.
prank.
Yeah. And what I also thought was funny is that JR threw that milk carton at our table.
Yes.
We squirted our youth pastor, JR. We were squirting him in his table because we were sitting at a different table. And towards the end of whatever, I don't know what meal it was, but towards the end of that meal, we just see this milk carton flying through the air, and it lands on our table and splatters everywhere. I mean, it was everywhere, and it was so funny.
And dude, we couldn't tell who did it for a while. We're looking around.
We were looking around. He did the same thing where he
What?
like throws it and then acts like nothing happens. Yeah, he was doing the same thing. Yeah, but that was a ton of fun.
Yeah, I love a good prank. Anyways, verse 12. When he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, "Do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you also should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. I am not speaking of all of you. I know whom I have chosen. But the scripture will be fulfilled. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. I am telling you this now, before it takes place, that when it does take place, you may believe that I am he. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever receives the one I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives the one who sent me." Right there I gathered where he says, what has been said in Scripture will be fulfilled, and the fact that he goes, it happens so that when it happens, you will believe. I think that's another reason that he pointed out, one of you is going to betray me. It's just to say, when they betray me and I fall, it's not because I'm weak. It's not because of any of these downfalls in me. No, look, here's where I know it's going to happen, right? It's kind of a way to show his glory and so that others will believe when it happens.
Yeah, I actually think that's kind of a cool perspective. I don't think I've ever thought of it that way, where it's like when this happens and I do get arrested, he's kind of laying it out there to his disciples. I mean, we get kind of the footnotes of what happened in that discussion and in that Last Supper, but we don't get all of it. I mean, that dude was probably laying his heart out to these people, and then he was just like, I can't imagine how tense that room was. I mean, the conversations that were going down, I can only imagine how like uncomfortable that must have been when Jesus is looking at all 12 of them and being like, you know what? One of you is going to deceive me. One of you is going to come against me. But I liked the perspective that you took about it when he's saying, like, when this stuff happens, it's not because of anything that I've done. It's to fulfill this prophecy that was already, put there beforehand. I had never really thought about that before. I thought that was a really cool perspective.
Yeah, I mean, when I read it, I was just thinking in my mind of the fact that if he hadn't have said, one of you is going to betray me, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. Think about it, that he never told him all these bad things are going to happen. And then all of a sudden, he gets betrayed, he gets arrested, and he gets killed on the cross. And they were staring at all of it, and he never told them that any of that was going to happen. And they would just be like, shocked. I'm sure it would have been like, wait, was this all a lie?
Yeah, I think that's another good point is doubt. Because, I can only imagine seeing all of these miracles happen right in front of me. This guy is coming and he's healing blind eyes. He's raising dead people up from the grave. And then you see him get arrested. You see him get beaten. You see him get charged to die. And then you see him get on the cross. And I can only imagine, like, if he hadn't have said those things, like, all the thoughts, like, I'm a big overthinker. So the thoughts running through my head is like, what just happened? Not 24 hours ago was I with this guy and he was telling me these things and he was telling me how much he loved me. And then let's say that he didn't tell them all the stuff that was about to happen. What would you be thinking in that moment?
You'd probably be thinking like, it's all false. It's like everything that I thought he was is wrong. What happened?
You would kind of start to deceive yourself, I think. I think you would, these guys were with him like 24/7. And the only time they weren't with him is when he withdrew himself to the mountain. And so in my mind, if I was a disciple and he didn't tell me these things, I would be sitting there going like, well, when he was withdrawing, I bet he was doing this, and instead of, I'm going to commune with my Father.
Yeah. And if he hadn't have said it, if you view from the point that he hadn't have put it all before him, in their minds, they would have been thinking, this is the Son of God, right? And so if he falls and he gets killed and these people just kill him and he didn't let them do it, in their mind, oh, they actually just killed him without him letting them do it, then he's not the Son of God, right? So the fact that it happened is because he let it happen. He was like, I want to give my life up. And so he told him that to show it's not because they're more powerful than me and overtook me. It's because this is the plan.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of just like going back to a cultural context, they were looking for this Messiah to be a king over these earthly, they were looking for the Roman Empire to be just destroyed, that this guy was going to rule on an earthly level. But he was sitting here going like, no, guys, y'all don't get the point. And so I think that the disciples were probably thinking at it from that kind of perspective too. And so I think it was just this information like overload and Jesus just laying out, okay, this is what's going to happen. And so when it does happen, don't be alarmed, And so I can only imagine, the disciples just through that whole conversation.
Yeah, I'm sure even him telling them was kind of shocking. So if he hadn't, it would have been even more shocking. But verse 21, after saying these things, Jesus was troubled in his spirit and testified, truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me. The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he spoke. One of his disciples, whom Jesus loved, was reclining at table at Jesus' side. So Simon Peter motioned to him to ask Jesus of whom he was speaking. So that disciple, leaning back against Jesus, said to him, Lord, who is it? Jesus answered, it is he to whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it. So when he had dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Then after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him. Jesus said to him, what you are going to do, do quickly. Now no one at the table knew why he had said this to him. Some thought that because Judas had the money bag, Jesus was telling him, buy what we need for the feast, or that he should give something to the poor. So after receiving the morsel of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. When he had gone out, Jesus said, now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and glorify him at once. Little children, yet a little while I am with you. You will seek me, and just as I said to the Jews, so now I also say to you, where I am going you cannot come. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, where are you going?" Jesus answered him, "Where I am going you cannot follow me now, but you will follow afterward." Peter said to him, "Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for you." Jesus answered, "Will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, the rooster will crow till you have the rooster will crow till you have denied me 3 times."
Wow. So just this whole passage, we see that Jesus gives this morsel of bread to Judas, and Jesus is saying to him, "Do quickly what you're going to do." What do you think? Do you think that Jesus was talking to Judas as a person, or do you think he was talking to the spirit that entered Judas?
Ooh. Oh, I don't know. Because obviously the devil had already entered him. And I think Jesus knew that. So, yeah, I think he probably was talking to the devil in that sense. I would almost think that.
I kind of think that he was talking to the spirit in him, because he's talking to it and he's saying, "Do quickly what you're going to do." And the disciples are kind of confused. And I'm sure this was kind of happening at a moment where he was laying this stuff out, and then he just hands a random piece of bread to this guy. And he's like, "Do what you're going to do quickly." It's like, dude, that doesn't even come close to the conversation we were just having. Like, what are you talking about, Jesus? And so I'm sure, like, and you also got to think, Jesus is looking at this world not as we look at it through our eyes. He's looking at it from a spiritual perspective. So, there's this earthly realm, there's a heavenly realm, and there's a demonic realm. And Jesus is God. And so he's seeing everything through this spiritual realm. And I can only imagine him seeing just like these demons and all these spirits. I'm sure he can see all of it.
Yeah. I bet he can too. I mean, I would think he's like literally seeing overlap. Now, I don't know exactly what that would look like. I mean, I have no idea. But I would think that too. And I would think he was talking to the spirit.
Yeah. I think it's just super interesting that he kind of just like, it's not necessarily in the middle of his conversation, but I don't know what the specific timeline is for this, or like how long it happened after he said, "One of you will betray me." But like from reading it, it really seems like it's just like bang, bang. Like, one of you's going to betray me. Oh, here, Judas, go do what you're going to do quickly. And so I don't know what the timeline on that was, but yeah, I just think that was super interesting that he talked straight to what I believe was the spirit that entered Judas and was like, "Do what you're going to do quickly." And that's like one of the only times you see Jesus talking like directly to Satan. I mean, he does it when Satan tempts him on the mountain, but then we see it again here.
Yeah. And something I wanted to point out of what we just read, my Uncle Scott, actually, the one that gave us these mics, this was a while back. AI was like Chat GPT and all these things are like just coming out, right? And he works in the computer field. And so he works with a lot of that stuff. And he came and we were talking as a family at some family gathering. I don't know if it was like Thanksgiving or something. Anyways, he said he was typing with AI and he was like, "Well, let me put this like to the test, see what it says." So he asked it, "So what if you were to make an 11th commandment, what would it be?" And it said, "Oh, well, I'm not at the level to do that. That's not my role." And he said, "Well, if you were, what would it be?" And it responded with, "Well, if you really want me to answer, I would go back to what Jesus said, to love your neighbor as yourself," right? Right here in this verse where he says, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another." And I don't know why that came to mind when I read that, but I think it's important that we realize that like Jesus said this. And so we should love one another, right? And love neighbor isn't necessarily the sense of who lives next to you, but also everybody like you come in contact with. They're your neighbors or your coworkers and things like that, that we should love them. And I definitely think that's a role as Christians we should do more of.
Yeah, for sure. And notice that he says, by this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. And I think that's super interesting, but also it makes sense. It makes sense to me because when you kind of break down like what a human is and like why we sin, number one reason is pride. It's all me, me, me. Like it's all what do I want? What's gonna satisfy me in the moment? What's gonna do this for me? There's never like I'm gonna think about what this person wants. I'm gonna think about what God wants. I'm gonna think about, and so this is so kind of counter intuitive to what we kind of think originally. You know, when you're walking down a sidewalk, you're not thinking about what the other person that's walking by you is feeling. You're thinking about what you're doing. You're thinking about, you know, the steps you got to take, what you got going on that day or whatever. But Jesus is saying here, by this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. And I think another reason for that is because it's so countercultural to love the person that's right next to you. Like, especially if you don't know who that person is. It's so countercultural because it's like in the mind of the unbeliever, it's like, why is this guy doing that? Because the unbeliever knows, oh, I'm a selfish human being. And so when he sees somebody being unselfish, it's like, well, why did you just do that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. It doesn't come natural to us as humans to love. So, last thing I gathered from this is in verse 38. Jesus is talking to him and he tells Peter, "You're going to deny me 3 times." Something I find interesting when I've obviously read this before, and as I think about it, I think about this. So if Jesus says, "Hey, you're going to deny me 3 times," and he's like, "What?" Right? And then he goes on and he denies him 3 times. And then after he does it, he realizes, wait, this is exactly what he told me. I've often wondered why in the middle of it, he doesn't remember what Jesus said. And then when I was thinking about it, I was like, well, when as humans we're sinning or in that spot he was in, right? In my eyes, I view it as we're so far away from him, we don't even remember anything he said, anything he's told us. It's just like, I'm on this track. And so you don't remember. And then after we're out of it, we're like, wait, he told me this, right? And so it's important to remember scripture because the moment you forget it is the moment you start to fall.
Yeah, I think that our focus is very limited. You can only focus on one thing. A lot of people say like, oh yeah, I can multitask. False. There's a reason that we can't text and drive at the same time. You know, like we're wired to focus on one thing at a time. And so I think that the Bible talks about that a lot. It's like, keep your eyes on me. Keep your eyes on me. And so I see that and I think, you know, God knows us better than we know ourselves. He knows that we can't focus on 2 things at once. And when we focus, whatever we focus on, that's what we're going to naturally gravitate towards. And so if we keep our eyes on him, we're going to gravitate towards him and all that comes with being a son and a disciple of Christ. And if we're having our eyes on all these worldly things and all these, you know, sins, and if we're you know, constantly struggling with guilt and we're struggling with shame and all these things, and we're focused on that and our pity, you know, we're going to naturally gravitate towards that. We're going to naturally gravitate towards depression and all these things. And so I think it's kind of cool what you were saying about that, about Peter, you know, being in the moment and being like, oh man, like, you know, I don't know what to do, when God already told him he was going to do this. You know, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, like I would think I would be prepared, but in that sense, you look at it, he just didn't remember what he said. And so he's making these choices because he doesn't remember what he said. And in the same sense, we got to remember what Jesus said and God said in the Bible. that we got to remember what he says so that we're prepared and don't fall.
Yeah, I love that. And I also kind of wanted to talk about the same kind of passage and the same kind of verse, talking about, hey, you're going to deny me 3 times. And I don't think we get to it in John, where it talks about Peter going and doing all these things. And, he's going to these campsites, basically. And these people are recognizing, they're like, you're this guy that Jesus was with. You were with him. You were with this guy. You were with the Messiah. And he's like, no, dude, I wasn't. And he does this 2 more times. And I actually did a sermon over this at a See You at the Park a while back. And God just kind of spoke to me and downloaded into my spirit that day was, because I didn't even plan this, but he kind of downloaded into my spirit, like, I want to be like Peter. And before you like lash out on me and be like, that's crazy, you want to deny Jesus, 3 times. Hold on. I want to be like Peter in the sense of this dude was not talking to anybody, but just by being around them, those people could tell that he had been with Jesus. I want to have that kind of aroma. I want to have that kind of thing where people see me and they're like, this dude's been with Jesus. And I think that's super powerful because it happens 3 times. He goes, he denies, and he runs away. Then he comes to another, campsite. Or he comes into another group of people. Same thing happens. They recognize him immediately. They're like, you've been with Jesus, haven't you? You're with this Messiah guy. And he's like, no. And then it happens one more time. And I'm like, dude, that's how people should look at us as Christians, is realistically, you've been with Jesus. And we don't have to deny him and be like, no, I haven't been with Jesus. Yes, I've been with Jesus. Let me show you who this guy is. Let me show you why I'm walking in joy. Let me show you why I'm walking in peace. And so, I thought that was a super cool kind of like way that God showed that to me, is like, I want to be like Peter in the sense of people recognize me just because I'm walking around. I don't even have to say nothing. Just because of my fruits and just because of my actions, they can say, oh, this guy's been with Jesus.
Yeah. Let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds. That was good. I find the stories of Peter and Judas and putting them side by side and all those things to be very fascinating. I love the stories of Peter. I love the story of him walking on water. Shout out the song Walk on Water by Audio Adrenaline. It's a great song.
Okay.
But yeah, that was a very good chapter. I loved all the deep dives.
Dude, yeah. There's a lot of stuff to dig into, and maybe we come back to this someday and we kind of break it down a little bit farther, because I honestly think that, we're spending a lot of time in these verses and trying to really break down what it means, but God's word is living. We see that in Hebrews 4:12. It's living and active, and it pierces through soul and spirit, bone and marrow, and it judges the thoughts and intentions of the heart. And so I think it'd be super cool if we can go back sometime to Jesus washing the disciples' feet, because I think there's so many things where it's almost like a double meaning. Yes, he's fulfilling prophecy, but also he's just like, he's doing like, I say that nobody can multitask. Jesus can multitask though. He's fulfilling prophecy. He's loving his neighbor. He's loving his disciples. And I just think this passage in particular, chapter 13, is really good. I think that you need to really like dig deep in this one and kind of really understand what's kind of going on.
Yeah, and when I read it even just now, we didn't talk about it really, but you can kind of see the sense of him talking about washing and being cleansed in the same sense of from your sins. Yep. And stuff.
And this is like, we didn't even talk about that, but that's what I'm saying. Like, you got to come back and read it over and over again and be like, okay, God, what do you have for me this time? Because what I love about God is, so I try to read Proverbs every morning. Sometimes I'm not the best at it. Sometimes I am. Sometimes I'm on a roll and I'll get like, 14, 15 days in a row. And some days I'm not very good at it. I'll go without it or whatever. But anyways, I try to read a proverb for the day of the month. So like, if it was like September 23rd, I would read the 23rd proverb, because there's 31 proverbs. And so most months have 31 days, or it caps out at 31 days. And so you just kind of get this like download of wisdom in the morning, and I love it. But what I really like about it is, you know, I almost thought it would get repetitive at first, where it's like I'm constantly reading these things every month. But every time I notice that God shows me something different. Yes, I see the same verse and I see the same passage every time, but also God's downloading in my spirit some different things. And even like if I were to read the same verse one month and then the next month, it could mean two completely different things.
Yeah, that's real. That's real.
And I love how God does that. I love his word and how it can judge your thoughts and intentions, and how he just knows us so well that he knows how to speak to us directly.
Yeah, and I think if you want to read something, even if you've read it before, when you go back and read it, it's gonna mean something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it also kind of just depends on your situation.
Yep.
Because you're going to read it one month, specifically for me, like in relation to Proverbs and how I read. I could read it one month and be in a completely different situation than I am the next month. You know, I could read it one month and be in, sorrow, life's going hard. And then the next month, full of joy, full of peace, full of, all the things that God has. And so I read the verse completely differently depending on what my mood is, what my situation is, what the circumstances are. And the crazy thing and the thing that I love about God is that his word doesn't change. My mood and my circumstances don't change his word.
Yeah. And something kind of on that line is we were doing this song for our walkout at our graduation. And the song is actually written, if you listen to the song, it's Best Day of My Life. And at the beginning of the song, it says, I dance with monsters through the night, and all these lines, right?
Do you know that brings me back to 2014.
Yeah. Do you know what the song's written about?
I don't.
So it's actually written about, I was looking it up, it's written about this kid story called Where the Wild Things Are. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you ever read that story?
I have not.
Okay. Well, the reason I said all that was to say we have this it's like a giant big blue book. And it's full of these just little kid short stories, like tons of them. And when I was a kid, we would read them. And so I was reading about this song, and it goes, oh, it's about this little kid story called Where the Wild Things Are. And it clicked in my mind. I was like, dude, I read that story 1,000,000 times when I was a kid. And so I ran and grabbed the book. And so recently, every now and then at night, I'll go and I'll read some kid stories and remember like way back then, right, when I used to read them. And it made me think, that's why I kind of came to that. If you want to read it, even though you've read it 1,000,000 times, you know the whole story, it still can mean something to you. So
yeah, and we've kind of proved that to ourselves. I mean, me and Gabe have already been through John, 1, 2, 3 times. And we keep picking up different things. God keeps revealing stuff to us, even as we just go through this on our podcast. Like, that's so powerful.
Yeah, and I've noticed you tend to pick up stuff that your mind's already set on. When I've been thinking about this aspect of life, this verse speaks to that aspect, and so it stands out to me.
How God's word doesn't change, but our mood and what we're thinking about changes, and so that's what we see.
Yeah.
That's kind of crazy. How we can pick out something different depending on how we are feeling that day or what we've been through. I think that's why it's important to just keep getting into the word.
Agreed. Well, do you have anything else?
I think I'm good. Chapter 13 was really well.
Yeah.
It was really good.
You'll have to come back for chapter 14. I think chapter 14, I'm about to be headed out to Alaska for vacation. So, Hopefully, I think Caleb's going to have Bryce Halleck on, if he can.
Yeah, we're going to try to get another, guest on.
Yeah.
And see if we can continue to break down John.
Chapter
it'll be
14.
Fun. Be a lot of fun. And even get to kind of interview into Bryce's life. He's got a cool testimony of how God changed his life and turned it around. So maybe we'll get to hear some of that. I think it'll be really powerful.
Yeah, so definitely come back and check that out. Y'all have a blessed day.
We'll see you next time.